Candace Lightner, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Thank you for having me. I'm pleased to be here. And I like the title.
Well, I feel like I'm already on with a friend. You and I have been speaking for about 15 minutes, and finally I'm like, Candace, I've got to hit record. We've got to go to work, you and I. So let's do it. Let's start this way. If you were to introduce yourself to our listening and viewing audience,
Mhm.
how would you introduce yourself today?
Oh, geez, I've never thought of that. Well, probably I'm Candace Lightner. I'm a victim advocate. I am an activist, which is one of my favorite titles to call me, frankly. I like making a difference, having an impact, and changing behavior.
Candace, I mentioned this to you in private, but I'll say it now in public. We have had the honor of interviewing about 1,000 leaders on this podcast, and you may have had as much influence nationally and globally than anyone else we've ever brought on.
I
And
think.
these are some real world changers we've brought onto the podcast. So this puts you in a unique class. So we're going to go back in time a couple
Mhm.
decades before May 3rd, 1980. Who was Candy Lightner?
Mm. Well, she was a single mother of three, including my twins, Cari and Serena. I was a licensed real estate agent, and that's what I did. I supported my family by selling real estate. I'm trying to think, what else did I do? Well, being a single mother takes up a lot of time when you have three children, and selling real estate takes up a lot of time. Although I was very fortunate in that I became successful fairly early in my career, which was deliberate, so that I could take off on Sundays and be home when my children came home from school. And although I was divorced, my ex husband was in the military, so he was gone a lot and traveled. So even when we were married, basically, I was the parent that was most frequently and most often at home.
Yeah.
I tried to schedule my work around my family in those days.
So that's who you were. And then there's this inflection point that profoundly changes your life and then eventually the world. To talk about May 3rd, 1980.
Well, Cari, my daughter, Cari and Serena were both very active. They were in all kinds of sports at school and after school. And one of the sports was softball. It was Cari's day to have their softball pictures taken. They were supposed to meet at the softball place. We had St. Mel's Catholic School down the street. They had a carnival every year on that date. And so they were also going to the carnival.
Yeah.
I had decided to take the day off and go shopping, and I was supposed to meet Cari at a certain time. And I do tell this story. The night before, I was trying to teach my children to give me advance notice when they wanted to do something. So
Yes.
if they wanted to spend the night with somebody or go to a party or whatever, would let me know enough ahead of time to make it more convenient for me to take them. So at the last minute on the Friday night, Cari said she wanted to go spend the night with her friend. And then they would come back home the next morning, and then I would meet her at home, and then they would go to the school carnival. So I, I was really upset that it was a very last minute thing. And in the car, all the way over, I was just going on and on about, why can't you give me notice? You've got to learn to give me notice. And when I got to the place where she was going to stay, her friend's home, I realized that I sounded like such a nag.
Yeah.
And I stopped and I just thought for a minute as she was getting out of the car, and I said, you know, Cari, you do know I love you, honey, don't you? And she said, oh, God, mother, don't be so mushy. Those were her
Hmm.
last words to me. And so the next day, she didn't come on time, and her father was supposed to pick her up too. So I went ahead and left and went shopping. And when I came home, I learned that she had been hit at like 1:20 in the afternoon by, well, we didn't know at the time, a drunk driver, that she had been run over and that it was a hit and run. And whoever had hit her had taken off. And my son had also been hit some years before when he was
Yes.
4, although he survived with permanent injuries, but he survived. And I kept saying, no, no, this can't be happening. God wouldn't do this to me twice. No, this can't be happening. And then they told me that, yes, that she was dead. We learned later, I think a couple of days later, when they finally caught him, his wife turned him in actually, that he was actually out on bail
Yeah.
from another hit and run drunk driving crash. that he had prior arrests and convictions for drunk driving, that he was still driving on a valid California driver's license when he killed my daughter, and that probably nothing would happen to him because that is the way, as the CHP told me, the system works. And that is the way it did work in those days.
We've advanced now over the last 4.5 decades that that part of the story is unimaginable. Like,
I know, I know. And you know, the problem, unfortunately, is people don't realize that's how it was then. So they get upset now if for example, if the driver who killed their child or whatever only got 10 or 12 years of prison. And I understand that it's still not just, but the man who killed my daughter wouldn't have even been incarcerated if I hadn't started MAD. And he got incarcerated for a whole 16 months in a halfway house
yeah,
where he went to and from work every day, still had a valid California driver's license, by the way, and went home on the weekends. And then, of course, as you may or may not know, after he was released, he had another
yeah.
driving crash where he hit a girl with the same name as my daughter, Cari,
Oh,
who was the same age as my daughter would have been had she lived, about a mile from where I killed my daughter.
what happened in that case?
He was actually tried in that case. And in my case, I was not allowed, because in those days, we weren't allowed to address the perpetrator of the crime in court like we are now. And that came about as a result of Matt and the work that we did. But when she was hit, she was injured, but not seriously. And they did ask her if she would like to speak to him, and she deferred to me
Mm.
and offered me that opportunity to go in and actually address him in court, which is the first time. Now, I had met his wife who turned him in, and she and I had many conversations, but that was the first time I was able to address him directly and speak to the grief and pain that he caused our family and Cari's friends after her death.
Do you remember broadly what you said to him?
Yes, I do, come to think of it. We call it a victim impact statement now. After she was killed, the media interview, after we started, after I started Matt and there was all this press and everything, and he pled no contest. And so then he was sentenced. The media went to interview him. And I watched the interview, and then they came and interviewed me, and he said, "Oh, I wish this hadn't happened. I would never do this again. I would give up my right arm, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah," and went on like that. And the media came to me and said, "What do you think?" I said, "He's lying. He will do it again." So I did address him with that. And I said, "Do you remember the interview that you did? And you said you would give up your right arm and you would never do this again?" Well, you did. And I do remember speaking to him about that, and then also talking to him about what Cari's death meant to us.
Mm. Candace, I haven't met you physically. I've followed your story for decades. And as you're going through this, I'm angry. Like
Yeah.
I'm sad, I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm upset for you and for countless other victims of these crimes. What for you? What role did anger play in not only your healing, but in your activism?
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is we don't heal. Grief isn't an illness, contrary to what psychologists and psychiatrists may say after a period of time that it is. It's not. Grief is a part of life. It's something that you do and need to do in order to survive, in my opinion. And so I don't think anybody ever heals from a loss. In fact, I don't know anybody that does, to be honest with you, and I certainly didn't. I actually wrote a book about it, but it's how to cope with grief and move on with your life. And that's what I've done is I cope and I move on. But grief is a part of my life and will be until the day I die. And I do say grief comes in three phases: the beginning, the middle, and the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Anger played the most important role in and was the reason why I started Matt. I was so angry that anyone could kill my daughter and get away with it. I mean, and I didn't blame him as much as I blamed the system that allowed him to continue to drink and drive. And that meant district attorneys, it meant judges, it meant laws, it meant whatever the system was in those days. I blamed it because it was enabling him to continue his behavior. And that's what I set about to change and did. And but you're right when you say anger. I think, more angry than grief stricken, to be honest with you. And thank God I was, because I don't think, and I've worked with so many victims over the years. I mean, thousands of them from all crimes, by the way, not just impaired driving. I think if I had been as grief stricken as I have seen other people, I never could have gotten Matt off the ground.
Right. You know, you're a real estate agent. You're grieving. You're a single mom. You're trying to wrestle with what do I do next in my life? Did you ever hesitate before stepping into the spotlight? This became very bright on you.
So I'm laughing. So I started Matt, as you may know, 4 days after she was killed, as soon
I
as the
do.
guy was arrested. And I was one of those people that could not speak in public. And I used to write poetry. And my office would ask me to get up and read some of my poems. And my knees would knock so badly. I mean, you just can't believe how badly they would knock. And I would be so terrified to do this. So it just didn't occur to me when I started Mad that I was actually going to have to get up and speak in front of people or that I would be interviewed. I was incredibly naive. I mean, I'm often called, or was then, Mrs. Smith Goes to Washington. I just had no clue. So, my psychiatrist, I was seeing a psychiatrist before my daughter was killed due to some early childhood issues, and had given me some Valium to take after she was killed. And I had taken one pill, and God, the thing just knocked me out. And I decided I didn't really like it, but he'd given me several. So I had cut them in half. I actually don't share this story very often, but anyway,
Hmm.
so the first time that I had to speak in public, I took a half a Valium because I was so terrified that I wouldn't be able to say anything without shaking. And so that worked, and then it helped. And I spoke at a press conference and announced the petition drive against the governor at that time. We wanted him to start a task force to solve the problem. And so that became like a good thing to do. Well, I went back to take half a pill. And so I went back to DC and I was doing all kinds of press for a big, big major event that we were doing and introducing a bill on the federal level. And I actually criticized Governor Brown publicly, and it was like front page news. I mean, this is all big deal
By the
stuff.
way, I remember when that happened. What you said was epic. Do you remember word for word what your line was?
I said he is more interested in tsetse flies than he is in dying children.
So Candace had been encouraged by everyone in PR and politics, keep your hands and voice down against the governor because we don't want to raise a stink. If you want into the office, be mellow, be
Mhm.
be be a good little girl, sit in the back row, and eventually it will get to you. And then when you get the opportunity to explain where Governor Brown's stance is on this, that's your comment, that he's more interested in the flies than he is in dead
Well,
children.
the thing about, well, I'm going to finish the Valium story because it has to finish, and then I'll get to this. So when I was there in DC doing all this, when I came home, it was like 2 in the morning, and we had to defer landing in San Francisco because of something and rent a car to come home. And when I grabbed the suitcase, when I got home, I didn't realize until the next morning I had grabbed the wrong suitcase.
Mm.
So my congressman called me at like 6 in the morning, and I'd only gotten home at like 2 or 3, and said, "You have to come down for a press conference." He said, "The press is here. They want to talk to you, and you've got to be here." So I called my girlfriend Sue, who was my right arm, and I said, "You have to come over because I have to speak." And I always spoke from a prepared text, and I always took a half a pill. So she came rushing over, and we opened up my suitcase, wrong suitcase, no pills. So I'm panic stricken, and she said, "Well, go ahead and speak while I'm taking a shower, and I'll write down what you're going to say." So we get to the press conference. She drops me off. She hands me what she wrote down. Now, keep in mind, I'd always spoken after taking a little pill, half a pill, and then prepared text. I go running in. I have her tablet. I sit down. And John Matsu says, "All right, here's Candy," and says his bit. And then I go to say mine. I look at the tablet, John, and it's written in shorthand. And I'm like, my God, no pill shorthand. Now what? And I truly, I finally looked at the press and I said, "You're going to have to forgive me." And I said to them, "I always speak from a prepared text. And unfortunately, what I have is shorthand. So this will be the first time that I've ever spoken without knowing exactly what I'm going to say ahead of time." And I went ahead and spoke, and I got a standing ovation.
Wow.
And so that ended the pills.
Thank heavens.
The prepared. Well, I still use prepared text. Now, the governor situation, in fact, I'm mentoring a victim now, and I've convinced her to go see the governor, which she is. So I just shared this with her the other day. The governor situation is I was trying to get in to see the governor. Obviously, I wanted this task force, no success whatsoever. So I used to show up at his office and I would bring sandwiches to the staff and he, nothing. I'd go in the next day and I'd carry balloons with me and our candy with me or whatever. It got to be a joke and everybody would laugh. And the people that would be visiting the Capitol would go by and see me. And of course, the press would cover this story. Why isn't the governor seeing Candace Lightner? Well, at that time, the farmers had a real problem with their crops having to do with tsetse flies or whatever. And so the governor was up and down the state checking out these flies. When we decided to do this press conference and call on the president at the time to form a task force, everybody asked me. They said, you do know that the press is going to ask you if you've seen the governor yet.
Yeah.
And what are you going to say? And I got a call from a guy who had an Armenian last name. That's all I can remember. And he was a governor's aide. And he apparently had heard this. Oh, no, I called him and I said, look, I'm going back and I'm going to call on the president for a task force and for a presidential commission. And and I know that the press is going to ask me this question. Wouldn't it be terrific if I could say, gee, I have an appointment with him when I get back? And he said, Mrs. Lightner, if you say one word about the governor, I will make sure you never see the governor.
Yes.
And it put me in such a quandary because I am an activist and I've been very blunt up to this point. And I just wasn't sure what to do. And I asked everybody and friends in the media and stuff, what should I say? What should I do? And they said, this is really up to you. You have to make this decision. We can't make it for you. So I get back and, we're doing this press conference and I'm with Cindy Lamb, whose daughter was the youngest quadriplegic in the world as a result of a drunk driver. And I think Laura was 9-10 months old at the time, but she was still a baby. And she was with us, bless her heart. And the first question it was the LA Times reporter asked me was, Mrs. Lightner, we understand that you've been trying to see the governor. Have you had any success? And it just came out. I said, no, because he's more concerned with tsetse flies than he is with dying children. So I figured, well, kiss this goodbye. I'm never going to see him. So accept that, whatever, and move on. So I get back and I had a meeting at the governor's office with all of his appointees whom I was trying to get to support the task force. And of course, they're governor appointees, so they're not going to do anything he doesn't want them to do. So I'm sitting at this big table in the back room and they're all there. And I wasn't feeling well, and I'd gotten home at some ungodly hour in the morning. I just wanted to go home. So I said, all right, just answer me yes or no. Are you going to support this or not? Don't give me any excuses. I just want a yes or no because I want to go home. So I would go around the table, and they kept talking and talking. And then I saw this little Armenian guy. I'm just going back. I wish I could remember his name. Come in. And I'm wondering why he's there. And he comes in, he stands behind me. And I go to get up and he sort of doesn't let me get up exactly. And the others are all talking. And I'm thinking something's wrong here. And I finally got upset and I said, look, I'm leaving. I want to go home. Yeah. And so he lets me up. And so I get up and he finally says, Mrs. Lightner, come with me. And I didn't have a clue what was going on. And so I did. And as I go with him, the whole gang comes behind me. And on the offices, I go down the hallway, all the offices are opening up and people are coming out and getting in the line behind me and this guy. And we don't go into the governor's office, which is a big, huge office. I think this is rather ironic. He guides me over to this tiny little office where there's only room for 2 people to sit. And he sits me down and I am now facing the governor, whom I had not met. And everybody is standing outside, basically. And he said, I'd like to introduce you to Governor Brown. And so I looked at him and Governor Brown says, I understand you want a task force to solve the problem. Because I used to emphasize that word solve, not study. I said, I do. And he said, well, you've got it. Well, I didn't believe him or hear him. So I started going on about the statistics and why it was needed. And he said, no, Mrs. Lightner, you've got it and you're going to be on it. And I looked at him and I said, I take back all the awful things I've said about you. And I broke down and cried, which is I only cried in public twice. And that was the first time. And I did. I got the task force.
And you changed state law, then
Mhm.
federal law.
In other
This
state law.
advocacy led eventually, Candace, I think 600,000 lives changed and saved
Mhm.
because of your advocacy.
Well, mine, and let me emphasize, I do know that this was my idea, but I couldn't have done it without the hundreds of mothers. And I will say predominantly mothers. We did have a few fathers in there, but it was predominantly mothers across the country who all joined in, participated. I mean, housewives turned to activists. I can remember calls. I'd be sitting in my office, and I remember Marie calling me from Pennsylvania and saying, heard what you're doing. My son was killed by a drunk driver. I'd like to get involved. And I would say, great. What would you like to do? Would you like to start a chapter? Had no clue, by the way, what that was, but would you like to start a chapter? And she would go, yes. And I'd say, fine, you're a chapter in Pennsylvania. And then she would go out and she would speak and she would get a task force formed. I mean, this was just like a domino effect around the country. I've never met so many motivated, unbelievable women who, in many cases, at least I did have a background in working, but outside the home, whereas many cases these women worked inside the home, never
Right.
spoken in public before. It was absolutely amazing. And the press will ask me, and you may too, what is the one thing that you've done out of all of this, raising the drinking age to 21, saving 600,000 lives, et cetera, that you're most proud of? And I am most proud of being an inspiration to so many people. I really am. I'm still doing it today, thank God, even at my age. And I still love the fact that people are inspired and motivated to go out and change the world. I think it's absolutely terrific. Don't you?
I think what you do is remarkable. And I
But
hadn't
don't
thought
you
about
think?
the individual effect on grieving moms frequently, or just moms who wanted to advocate the spark that you were in their lives to get up and do even more.
But John, you're an inspiration too. And doesn't that give you some sense of joy and happiness to know that you can inspire people to overcome horrible odds or unbelievable tragedy? I counsel and work with a number of victims, and I see victims that honestly, unfortunately, don't recover, can't
Right.
recover, or have a hard time. And so, the heartbreak that's involved. But when you see those that can, they don't have to change the world, but that can survive and move on. And I don't know, to me, it's just very, very motivating. What can I
Well,
say?
I know your story well enough to know that many of the leaders who approach you, the grief they're dealing with isn't involving a car accident, a crash, a death.
Right,
It can be
right,
abuse, it can be addiction, it
right.
can be a million things, and yet
Yep.
they find hope and inspiration in your story. Why do you think that is?
I honestly, I think because number one, when I started Mad, I didn't have an inspiration. I didn't know anybody else in the media that was doing what I was doing. And so it was sort of on my own. And I think a lot of other people would like to do things, but when I started Mad, there was so much attention drawn to what I was doing, and my story was told over and over again that they finally saw someone who was doing what they wanted to do.
Yes.
And in fact, I remember when I was here in DC, there was a police officer who would go and speak in schools about drugs, and he would take a casket with him and he would do this whole presentation on drug dealers, and he would show pictures of the drugs that they had in the back of their car and the riches that they made and the fancy cars that they would drive. And he would say, this is their life, and is this what you want to do and be? And then he would bring a casket in with a body in it, and he would take it down the hallway or down the school, whatever assembly. So, and he would say, this is what can happen. These are the good things, this is the bad thing.
Right.
Well, he did a story, and I heard him say, and they said, well, why are you doing what you're doing? And he said, because I want to be like that woman. Well, I was in DC at the time, or Virginia. So I contacted him and I said, that woman is in your backyard.
Remarkable.
Yeah. So he invited me and I came to his presentation and spoke. But, I think people just see the story and think, God, if she can do that, so can I.
You and I, before I hit record, we're talking about, I shared with you that two of my friends in college died
Mhm.
by drinking and driving accidents.
Mhm.
And when I
Crashes.
said that, both times you corrected me and you
Yeah.
said crash,
Crash. Oh,
right?
yeah.
Collision.
Yeah.
Why is it important to make sure we are very intentional when we do and when we don't use the word accident?
Well, defense attorneys often use the term it was just an accident, unfortunately, successfully. And it's enabling process to people to continue to make these choices. And in reality, it is a choice. I mean, every driver, look, the man who killed my daughter had multiple from understood from his wife outside of where when he was caught, many times of drinking and driving when he wasn't caught, and crashes when he wasn't caught and paid off the people. These are all choices people make. They know it can cause death and destruction. They know this and they still make those choices. They can plan ahead, they can get taxis, they can do whatever. There's so many other things you can do. And that's true of distracted driving and drug driving and speeding and so many other things. When I was doing that, I started this about crash versus accident. You call it a crash. And in reality, John, drunk driving is a crime and it is a violent crime, even though the FBI may not consider it a violent crime. There are other states that have passed laws that do. And it is violent. I mean, my daughter was thrown 125 feet. Her body was so badly mutilated, I couldn't donate anything. So, I mean, this is violent. I really was big on not using this word. And I use the word crime if after they've been convicted. And you don't see them, police say, oh, this murder was an accident. You know, they don't call that an accident or robbery an accident. It's only impaired driving and motor vehicle crashes they call accidents. And so they're crimes. So we started it, We Save Lives, the campaign Crashes versus Accident, and we actually lobbied and succeeded in getting AP style book to redefine the word accident and how the media should and shouldn't use it. And we got a lot of stories changed and reporters started changing the stories and using the word crash, collision, and now hopefully after a conviction crime. Well, recently, and this is rather interesting, I think, but I've mentored various people throughout the years, and one young man that I tried to mentor or help when he was trying to pass a law in California after his daughter was killed via fentanyl, drug poisoning, Alexandra's law. We were talking one day, and he said to me, do you know what your daughter's death certificate says for manner of death? Well, a lot of her things, she has an exhibit at the Smithsonian. And so a lot of her things are at the Smithsonian. And I'm assuming the death certificate was because I didn't have a copy. And so I said, no, I don't know what it says. And he says, I bet you it says accident. And I said, no, can't say accident. He was convicted. And he said, find out and see. So I sent away for her death certificate. And there were two. One was pending. And I opened that one first and I thought, oh, but after the conviction, surely it'll change and say homicide, because there's only five choices that the coroners have. I think it's homicide, suicide, accident, undetermined, and sorry, I can't think of the fifth off the top of my head. The second one said accident. And, anger, me, I was so angry. I thought, well, wait a minute. It wasn't an accident. It was a homicide. And so I said to Matt, so we all got back together and I said, wait a minute, mine says accident. He says, yeah, so does my daughter's, even though her dealer had been convicted, I think, of murder. And I said, you're kidding. So I thought, we decided to talk to name the president of the National Association of Medical Examiners. And I will tell you, I thought that was a complete and total waste of time, who had all kinds of excuses. Oh, we're doctors, we're not lawyers. This is an illegal issue. And it is, in fact, a public health issue. Let's face it, crashes are a public health issue. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. So we're all thinking, there was, I think, four or five of us on the call. Three were drug poisonings. Their children were killed in drug poisonings. The other one was, like me, and his daughter was murdered, now considered murder in California because of the wanton provision by a drunk driver, and she was 14, and this had happened very recently. And so we're on the call trying to get them to change their policies, and he just, oh, we've been doing this for 20 years, blah, blah, blah. And we're all talking about how this is misleading data and science and giving wrong information, because a lot of times they look at death certificates to determine, how someone died, to see how many people are killed in drunk driving crashes or drug poisonings or whatever. And I said to the gang afterwards, they were saying, oh, what can we do? I said, you know what? I'm just going to start a campaign. We're going to start a campaign. Matt, want to join me? And I kind of specialize in coalitions and campaigns, but I'd never done it outside of our group, meaning outside of the cause of crash fatalities. And it's been my honor, my pleasure to work with these, well, pleasure isn't the right word, really it isn't, but to work with these victims of drug poisonings. And by the way, I do have a son who is a sober now, but is an addict. And I have another close family member who's in rehabilitation, and I'm a former drug counselor. So it's not a subject I'm not familiar with. So We Save Lives is sponsoring the campaign. It's called Not an Accident, and it has to do with the manner of death reported on the death certificates. And right now, we can't change that. We have no way. We can't go to a coroner and have them change it. We've tried. We're introducing a bill in California. It's my understanding it will be the first of its kind to allow us, once the determination has been made, once the perpetrator has been convicted of the crime, whatever it is, speeding, distracted driving, drugged driving, reckless driving, drunk driving, obviously. But once there is a conviction, we can go back in through a process and get the death certificate changed to show homicide.
And as you were talking there, I was thinking about all the times in my life when I've thought about something that should be done, and then I thought someone should do something about that.
I think that
And
too.
then there's you, and you hear about something, and it's like, what am I going to do? So talk about this agency, you, to see a hill, a mountain that is not in your universe at all, but for you to say, let's go. I'm going to build a coalition. I'm going to grab some friends and we're going to grab whatever we need to do in order to make the change that needs to be made. Just talk about that willingness that you have to do so and what it means for the rest of us.
Well, my father, when the press would ask, why your daughter? Why is your daughter doing these things? My father used to say, she was always rebellious. Even as a child, she was rebellious. I can't stand injustice. It just drives me nuts. If there was a foundation that said we would grant you, X amount of dollars to go out and help people change injustice and fight injustice and whatever, I would do it.
Mhm.
And it's called Catch Me Before I'm Gone, at the age of 79, who knows how much time I have left, but I would do it. I mentor victims now and they'll say, oh, I tried this and this, and I'm going, but wait a minute. What do you mean you tried? Why didn't you say this? Why you should be an activist and and I get inspired by doing that because I love doing it. I like seeing people create change. I like seeing an end to all injustice, frankly, but we all have different definitions of it. But I just feel that we should have justice in this world, and
Yes.
so many of us don't. I mean, when I see story after story on Facebook, and they'll say, well, we have a case now that I'm working with the victim, and this was a hit and run. This was not classified as drunk, drugged, or whatever. Anyway, it was hit and run driving, and the gal, I think she still had drugs in her system the next day, but they couldn't show alcohol. And she had had other prior hit and runs. I mean, just a horrible
Oh,
driving
gosh.
record, unbelievable. And they had texts from her family members saying, get rid of the bottles after she left the scene, make it difficult and all this kind of, I mean, just horrible. I mean, really is a horrible story, by the way. And so she was sentenced to like 9.5 years of a determinate sentence. And all of a sudden, the victims have found out she's getting out after 2.5 years. I mean, this is not a first time offender here. And I mean, we're just also horrified by this. And the victim's mother, Kelly, is saying things like, well, we should have full, disclosure, whatever. And I finally said, oh, for God's sakes, no, what you should do is go see the governor and tell him to stop the process.
Yeah.
And she's going, really? And I'm saying, yes, quit worrying about all this other stuff and go get it stopped. But so she is, by the way. And so, because I'm meeting on Wednesday with this aide, but that's still getting into his office. And I do this a lot, and I actually get real excited doing it. It's just, some people get excited about some things. That's something that excites me.
So we save lives partially is about driving while impaired through drinking, of course, but it's so much more than that. To talk about the other outreaches that you're trying to make sure we, the community, recognize are potentially deadly when we're driving, when we're behind a wheel, or when we're
So we
next to someone who's behind a wheel.
Thank you. So we actually have a number of campaigns. When during COVID, I lectured at Columbia University. And so I also gave up my car. I had been in a crash several years before that totaled my car. It was a distracted driving crash. And it was a nurse driving, and she was distracted. She totaled my car and her car. And unfortunately, it broke my back, although you wouldn't know it. And, I move around and deal with pain. Anyway, so I gave up my car for a period of time. I had son run over, a daughter killed me. I was like, enough. And I
Yeah.
became a passenger. And becoming a passenger, I started seeing things that you don't realize as a driver. And I found I had to set boundaries. And so if I was getting in a taxi, I would say, you cannot use, any device. You have to focus on the road or I'm not getting in the car. Now, I will tell you here, taxi drivers have those policies in place, and it really wasn't a problem most of the time. But it's why I don't use Uber and Lyft, because they do use their cell phones and stuff while driving, and they do have to look at their maps. And I would have to do it with friends. Now, I never had to do it on drunk driving because nobody would dare do that with me in the car, but a lot of times on distracted driving. So I started thinking about the role of a passenger.
Yep.
I lectured at Columbia. I started role playing with, these were post MBA students and stuff. And I would say, have you ever ridden in a car with somebody who's drunk? And several people would raise their hands. How about somebody who's drugged? More people would raise their hands. And they would say legal or illegal. And I'd say both. And I say distracted. And everybody would raise their hands. And I thought, my God, we've got a real problem here.
Yes.
And I looked at the statistics and I found how many passengers were being killed in these crashes. And so I came up with this idea for a campaign, passenger safety, and I contacted the National Road Safety Foundation. The founder of that, Fred Manacharian, has been a mentor to me over the years. And I said, is this something, because I don't have the funding, We Save Lives isn't another MAD by any means. And so I said, would you all be interested in partnering with me on this and helping me develop this campaign? And I had been already writing on it for 2 years. And they said, send us what you've got. I did. They said, yes, thank God they did. And we actually launched it 5 years. This is our 5th year. NHTSA has it on their calendar. The Governor's Highway Safety Association is involved. We have over 60, maybe 70 organizations now, not just in this country, by the way. Other countries have started to pick up on it too. So the last week in January is National Passenger Safety Week, where we focus on empowering passengers to speak up when they're in the car with a dangerous driver. I get really passionate about these things, so
Yeah.
you have to bear with me. But it's like, why would you get in the car with somebody who's drunk? Why? You're not going to sober them up. You're not going to save them. You either need to try and dissuade them gently from driving. Don't do anything that's going to get you killed, or not get in the car. And so this is something I'm really proud of and very excited about and going strong. And then during the summer, it's called the 100 Deadliest Days of Summer, and it's when most teens are killed. And a group of us came together and decided we wanted to work together on changing that from 100 Deadliest Days to 100 Safest Days. So we started the 100 Safest Days campaign. And that starts the end of May and goes through past Labor Day. And again, we have a number of partners that have joined in during this 3-month period of time. We focus on empowering teenagers to drive safe, empowering their parents to help them learn what it means to drive safe. And this came about, at least in my case, as a result of a friend of mine whose teenage daughter was killed in a car with 5 other teens. It was a teen driver that caused the crash or was responsible for the crash. And the mother, my friend, would say to me, if only I had known she was going that day, and there were 5 kids, because you should never have 5 kids in the car. If only I had known. And so I developed a parent checklist for parents to look at. Do you know who your child is riding with? Are they licensed? Are they insured? I mean, how many parents look at that, John?
That's
How
right.
many parents ask those questions? And these are all things that parents can do to help keep their child safe. And then I did, this was not a coalition thing that I did, but it's one I really love. And it's called, and I want you to do this, John, it's called But Not While Driving. And so you add this to your mobile device signature, but not while driving, so that whenever you respond to a message, people know that you're not driving when you respond. And we lobbied, I don't know if you know this, but we initiated a petition drive for Apple and lobbied them to add do not drive app on their phones. In fact, I got that idea from being in a plane and pilots saying, put your do not fly or whatever it's called app. And I went, oh, this is cool. Do we have this on cars? No, we don't. So I came back, talked to some people and said, hey, let's go after Apple or whomever, but Apple was my choice because that's all I knew. And we started a petition drive, and within a year they did. So I just see these things that need to be addressed. And I figure, somebody has to do it. So,
Mm.
sometimes I do it on my own. Sometimes I get help. So it just depends.
Candace, you're amazing. I honestly could spend a lot more time borrowing your energy, borrowing your activism, and borrowing some of the joy you have in the midst of struggle. It's a beautiful thing. I do have three quotes that I want to run by you. They're yours. And then seven questions. We call them the Live Inspired Seven. So as we move toward the finish line, the first quote I wanted to ask you about, these are your words. One person really can make a difference
Mhm.
if they are willing to stand up and say enough.
Mhm.
Tell me about that.
Well, the problem is people aren't willing to stand up and say enough, or they don't do it publicly, or they don't do it boldly. And so my feeling is that if you stand up and say enough, after a while, people will listen. And hopefully you'll change at least one person's mind.
So I have 10 quotes, but I'm only using three. So here we go. Number two, we did not want sympathy. We wanted change.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great one.
The toughest thing that I had to deal with and was warned about was try not to cry in public, because if you do, that's what they'll focus on. And I mentioned to you, I only cried twice, that one time with Governor Brown and one time on the Today Show with Bryant Gumbel. And sure enough, that's what they focused on. So I really didn't want sympathy. I wanted to change things so that people wouldn't experience the kind of heartbreak that I had.
Mm.
And I still mean that today. I still feel that way. We don't need your sympathy. What we need is for you to do something positive and make sure this doesn't happen again.
Final quote is, I turned my anger into action because doing nothing was no longer an option.
I don't see how people cannot do that. I mean, you hear people complain all the time, and I'll say to them on Facebook, have you ever thought of not whining and instead contacting your legislator or speaking out or doing, I make all these suggestions on things they can do. And sometimes they do. And sometimes I'm sure they ignore me. But it's like, if this is something that really bothers you, then you need to speak out. I get blasted periodically because I'm very opposed to certain things in this administration, but I feel like if I don't speak out, then I'm enabling this process to continue. And I am not an enabler. I don't believe in enabling. And I think when you don't speak out to become an enabler, you become part of the problem.
Mm. Well, Candace Lightner, world changer. We have seven questions that tether all of our mighty guests together. The first one is, what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Oh dear. I don't read impactful books. Sorry. Mine. To
Tell
cope
us
with
about it. Which one?
I only wrote one, co-wrote one, How to Cope with Grief and Get On with Your Life. And I will say this, even though it sounds like I'm bragging about my book, but my book is a sharing of stories. And so I interviewed these people, and I had a co-writer after a period of time, thank goodness, Nancy Hathaway, who's a beautiful writer, by the way. And she and I would interview these people together. And the stories that we would hear were just absolutely heartbreaking. The fact that many of these people, well, they all survived the grief and pain. And we covered all kinds of deaths, from HIV, from AIDS to murder to you name it. We covered
Yeah.
it. And so to me, that was impactful. The fact that these people not only shared their stories, but survived and in some cases thrived
Mm.
as a result of their grief. I'm not a reader of self-help books, so sorry.
Instead, you're just living it. I'd rather do something worth being written about than write something worth doing. So, congratulations on your life. What's one positive characteristic or one trait that you possessed as a child and wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
Flexibility. I grew up in the military. I mean, I tell people I was born in the military, raised in the military, married in the military, divorced in the military, and retired after 32 years of service. So, in order to move from place to place, go from school to school, probably flexibility. I find I'm less flexible and I'm a little bit more rigid and probably far more opinionated than I was then. But at that time, I looked forward to new adventures and
Yeah.
new people and new friends. So, I would have to say flexibility.
If your home caught fire and all living things were out and you have an opportunity of running back into that house and grabbing one item that mattered to you, what would you grab?
I guess because I'm getting rid of things now, a lot of things, more things are going to the Smithsonian and stuff that I've had to learn, frankly. And as I've aged, I've had to learn to start letting go.
Yeah.
And so I'm in this process of letting go and not hanging on to anything that's meaningful because I don't want my family to be stuck with all kinds of junk after I'm gone. So I can't give you a really good answer to that, unfortunately.
I think you
My
kind of did
computer, my
as you
laptop.
as you humbly dropped the mic and said, "Well, I'm giving things to the Smithsonian." Let me
Okay.
just say this, Candace: the Smithsonian is not calling John O'Leary or the vast majority of our other guests for their stuff. So congratulations on donating some items to the Smithsonian. Pretty powerful. If you
Oh,
could sit on a bench on a gorgeous day and have a
mhm.
long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like to be next to?
Oh, my daughter, Cari, no question about it. Cari.
How meaningful for you was it that the final words you spoke to her were spoken in love? Because I've never actually heard you share that part of the story before, where you dropped her off and you're frantic, and anyone who's got a kid knows what it's like to yell in the back of the car, to tuck in the shirt, fix the hair. Did you brush your teeth? All the stuff parents do downhill toward their kid. And the last thing you said to your daughter was just, you just
Mhm.
love her. I mean, does that mean more that that was the final thing you said to her?
Well, I'll tell you what means more to me was her response,
Yeah,
which was, "Oh, godmother, don't be so mushy," because that meant to me she knew that it was spoken in love.
right
And
on.
so the fact that she realized that, Cari had a wonderful sense of humor, as does her sister Serena, but that probably means more to me than what I said to her, to be honest with you.
Thank you. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, geez. It was from a former board member of MAD, one of my first board members of MAD, and starting this and not knowing what I was doing and learning as I go type of thing. And I remember once he said to me, "You don't need to take everything so personally. You need to not overreact. You need to calm down. You don't need to be the drama queen. You realize you just don't need to take everything so personally." And I had to stop and think about that because at that time I did, because I didn't know any better. I knew about business because I sold real estate, but I didn't know about politics and how things work. So I would have to say that. And I followed that advice to this day. I still do that. I try not to take everything so personally and realize that it's not my issue. Usually it's the other person's issue and it has nothing to do with me. It has more to do with the other person or politics or whatever.
There was a book I read 15 years ago called The Art of the Possibility, I think. And there's a guy who's always getting tense and angry. And then someone would come up and whisper to him rule number three. And then it would happen again. And then someone would come up and whisper rule number three. And it happened repeatedly. And then finally the visitors said, "What in the world is rule number three?" Because afterwards you completely change. And it turns out that rule number three is don't take yourself so gosh darn seriously.
Yeah, that's good.
Right. And that's what you're saying right now. Like you just don't have to take it all so seriously. What a great way to lead a movement. All right, down to two questions. What would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Oh, geez. My 20-year-old self was a mother of twins, was a single mother of twins. So I would probably, I would probably tell myself it's going to get better.
Wow.
It has to get better. Single supporting mother of twins, twin babies. I would probably tell myself things will get better.
Candace Lightner,
Mhm.
it has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
Oh, she didn't win the lottery. So I told everybody to put on the, after I'm cremated, I buy lottery tickets. It was, oh, hang on. I tried. That's it. I tried. And I asked them, well, I'm going to be cremated. But I said, if you want to put anything up anywhere, it would be the words, I tried. And I did. And I continue to.
I think out of everything you've accomplished, 600,000 lives saved, state and federal laws changed, movements not only started by you, but the encouragement of others. The fact that here you are nearing your eighth decade,
Mhm.
79, that you're still trying. I find it so beautiful and gratifying that your best days are in front of you still.
Oh, thank you. I hope so. My mantra is soon to be 80. So when I forget something, it's soon to be 80.
Candace, you do so much work still. Where can people learn more about your efforts today?
Well, they can go to I have a personal website, CandaceLightner.com, and then WeSaveLives.org, and then the notanaccident.info, which is our newest campaign and the one I'm doing now. And of course, nationalpassengersafety.org. We have a website there, and 100 Safest Days has a website. So we have various websites. So they have a number of opportunities. Wikipedia threw me out because I wasn't famous enough. So on CandaceLightner.com, I have my own Wikipedia. So if you want any information, you can go there. But anyway, I don't know. Just Google me, I guess. Ask me.
Just Google me. All right, my friend, I will just Google you and I will continue to look up to you. I thank you for your work and your advocacy and your impact. It's profound. Candace Lightner, thank you for living inspired.
Oh, thank you.